Yeah, low potassium foods, and I back some over a list of all the things that we give patients about potassium and phosphorus and such to help them with managing their diet. Yeah, so that we're doing what we can, and we'll see where we go from here. I'm waiting for them to call us back tomorrow and hopefully get us a surgery date time. I would love it if it was this week.
Okay, well, I mean, I know if I wasn't mistaken, I thought it was going to be Friday. The time wasn't exactly sure, if I'm not mistaken.
You think it's Friday?
I'm thinking that I believe Dr. Warner office. I talked to them today. They said it would be Friday, but they were not sure of the exact time. Just
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's already Tuesday, so that's not awesome.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's good. At least I got a better understanding of it now. Of what's really going on.
Aren't you glad I used to work in surgery?
Well, yeah, I would say so. I would say you're about the most complete person I've talked to through DaVita. Yeah. Since I don't think I've talked to really. Right. Well, hey, but I appreciate your thoroughness.
All right. Thank you much. I appreciate it. Glad that you said that they're with you Friday.
All right, thank you. All right, bro. Hey, call on Yahweh Shimmy Al-Shai, Shimmer Kakwadash, Barak Yahweh, Barak Yahweh Shai, Barak Yahweh, Barak Yahweh Shai, Barak Yahweh, Barak Yahweh Shai, Shimmer Kakwadash. All praise and glory, Yahweh Shimmy Al-Shai, Shimmer Kakwadash. Shalom, Wall, Ball, Death to America, Death to Third, Death to his wicked ass kingdom. America, or Iran has just shot off nuclear. I'm not a Salakia. Iran has just shot off surface to ground and air missiles over to Iraq, American Air Force bases, I believe, military bases. Hey, I'm just gonna let it play. I'm not gonna talk very much. I'm going live and just let it show on Al Jazeera, and we're just gonna watch it from there. Whoever sit and enjoy the show, brothers. Get your popcorn, get your movie glasses. Hey man, let's enjoy this site, man. Kolo Yahabashim Al-Shabashim Kakodash. Brati Habatel Shah, Brati Habatel Shah, Brati Habatel Shah, Shimmer Kakodash. Hallelujah, Shalom, Wall, Ball, Death to Meg, Death to Third, Death to this wicked ass king. All right. With that said, I'm going back over to Al Jazeera.
Will give the liberty or the freedom to their proxies in the region to retaliate in the way they selected. So it's for me, I think this is the most they can do. They don't want to go in a war, or we can say a war that is a comprehensive war, a conventional war with the Americans, because they are unable to to do so, but also I think Americans also do not want to go to the war because the decision for the war can be easily started, but no one can have the decision to end the war.
That's interesting that you say that, because that's diametrically opposite to what Mr. Esper, the US Defense Secretary, was saying. He was saying, we don't want to start a war, but we will end the war or a war with Iran. But given the place that you had on the periphery of that decision-making process in the United States, what is the process that they're going through now if they're deciding to react or to retaliate? And what kind of targets would they go for if they're not going to go for, what Mr. Trump was talking about 3 days ago, cultural sites?
It depends on the impact and the results of this kind of attack. If that attack would be resulted of heavy casualties on the Americans, there would be the retaliation something different. If there would be no casualties, it's only minor casualties or materialistic casualties, then the retaliation will be different also. So it depends on the evaluation of format of the attack and how the American would be reacting towards this kind of attack. So in my perspective, that the Americans will favor to de-escalation the situation because I think their forces in Iraq are vulnerable. There are lots of, non-state actors could deliver the message or deliver the reaction, and that would be causing a lot of casualties maybe. And therefore, I think the United States will go for de-escalation of the situation.
Okay, Mr. Al-Sudani, thank you so much for joining us there from Virginia on Skype. Let's just pause for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, just to get you right up to date as to what's happening. You're looking at, it's on a loop. It doesn't make particularly exciting television news, I know, but these are the very latest pictures of what we understand is going on. Iran has launched missile strikes aimed at US troops in Iraq, in what it said was retaliation for the killing last week of Qasem Soleimani. We're showing you pictures of what's gone on overnight local time at the Al-Assad Air Base. It's in the Anbar province of Iraq. It was a big US contingent. It was hit at least, according to one report, 6 times, another report saying 9 times. One report that we at Al Jazeera have got is talking about 13 missiles having been fired. Iran's IRGC, that's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, claiming responsibility. They issued a statement. I'm going to read it to you. The brave soldiers of IRGC's aerospace unit have launched a successful attack with tens of ballistic missiles on Al-Assad military base in the name of martyr General Qasem Soleimani. Let's bring in Osama bin Jubayd, our correspondent in Baghdad, who joins us on the line from the Iraqi capital. Osama, so details still coming through all the time.
Yes, Peter, in the last 15 minutes, we've heard a confirmation from the northern Iraqi Kurdish region that multiple missiles have landed in Erbil. This is coming from sources close to the government in the Kurdish region of Iraq. So this is the second location which has been hit by these missiles that have been fired from Iran. We know that via the Tasnim news agency as well as other official news agencies in Iran that multiple missiles have been fired. At least 13, according to Iraqi security forces, have landed in the Ain al-Assad base. Multiple have landed in Erbil. So far, we don't know about casualties or damage that these missiles have caused. According to the same agency, a second wave of missiles has also been launched. So it looks like it is a sustained attack which is happening on Iraqi targets here, coalition targets rather, here in Iraq. It is coming from Iraq. It is interesting that Iran has chosen that it is going to be launching the attack itself. There was a lot of fear here that Iranian proxies would be used perhaps in the region. There was a lot of speculation about ground attacks. And so for coalition forces have been hunkering in various places. We've seen a lot of movement in the last 24 hours in the green zone as well, where there was multiple back and forth from the green zone. This was happening right around the time when the letter was released by Iraqi sources about the United States confirming that it was withdrawing from Iraq, which was later redacted by the Defense Secretary in the United States. So here is what we know so far. Ain al-Assad base has been hit. Erbil has been hit. No word yet on what sort of damage to facilities or infrastructure has been caused. Ain al-Assad base in itself is a sprawling complex. We've seen multiple facilities. The troops who have been there, especially after the fall of ISIL, have been in the last few months. There was a very relaxed atmosphere there. You could go there, you could play games with sport with the troops there, and it is a very important logistical hub smack in the middle of Iraq. Because if we were to take any logistical supplies, whether it was heavy equipment or refueling, you'd have to stop at the Ain al-Assad base. It was one of those locations where we stopped on our way to the Al-Qaim checkpost. Al-Qaim was the area where this all started to kick off when the United States attacked Kataib Hezbollah, the Hezbollah Brigades group on the Iraq-Syria border, in retaliation to an attack that it accused on Kataib Hezbollah in Kirkuk. After that, we saw that Kataib Hezbollah and the Popular Mobilization Forces joined together and attacked the U.S. Embassy compound, and on Friday culminated in the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who was the second in command of the Popular Mobilization Forces.
Just as you're talking to us there, Osama, giving us the backstory on the nature of this particular base, I see there's a Pentagon statement has dropped now as well, saying they're basically into an assessment procedure now on this base. But they're also talking about looking after their US military and coalition personnel at Al-Assad and Erbil. Now, when they talk about Al-Assad and Erbil, are they talking about two different bases on the ground, or are they conflating two different locations into one big potential target?
These are two completely different locations. Erbil is the capital of Iraq's, northern Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region, where U.S. forces are based. There is a massive presence there, where operations inside Syria especially are carried out from Erbil, where there is a presence of U.S. forces near Erbil airport as well, where the logistical support as well as military support is carried out. You must remember as well that all of the troop movements which were happening inside Syria were being carried through Erbil. It wasn't coming from Turkey in the Incirlik base, but rather all the ground movements were happening from Erbil. So Erbil has a significant presence of U.S. forces and air assets as well. So yes, Erbil it would probably be a target for the Iranian forces if they wanted to hit coalition targets. And then a few by the way, I'd say is this base Ain al-Assad in Anbar province. Anbar province, yes, it is north central Iraq, but it is very significant, and these are completely different locations. On the readiness of the troops, so we've been hearing warnings. We'd also heard from Mark Esper saying that the commanders on the ground are taking particularly the kind of steps that they need when he was asked about whether the threat level was at C or D, because those signaling the kind of preparedness that each base needs to be at. And something that we've seen on the ground as well, especially during the fight against ISIL, if you were at a FOB, forward operations base, you would know on the base immediately what the threat level was. That would mean whether you could be in your civilian clothes, whether you'd be allowed to take your security gear off, whether you'd be able to take your helmets off, or would have to keep all of your gear on even when you sleep. So there was a level of security, there was a security alert and level of preparedness you would imagine at all of these facilities across Iraq. Ain al-Assad is not the only base. There are other bases and forward operations bases across Iraq where there is a presence of not just US, but coalition forces as well.
Osama, let's stay close. Let's go back to Washington and John Hendren. is our correspondent monitoring all the political and military developments off the back of the events at the Al-Assad base. And also now we understand, although the Iranian authorities, the Revolutionary Guard, have not spoken about this specifically, Osama making the point there, talking about a bill which is 800 miles-ish away from the Al-Assad base. So it looks like there's a two-pronged attack has gone on. Is it still going on, John Hendren? We don't know. But to go directly for US interests on the ground in Iraq, on the part of the Iranians, that's quite a bold move, because there had been a supposition that they might go for something, wrapped up in the word proxy.
It is. This is a bold target. It's very bold that Iran has said that those rockets were launched from Iran itself. You might have expected in the past for these militia troops on the ground, Iranian militia troops, to be attacking those bases. But this is a very clear message from Iran. We did just get confirmation from the Pentagon that Erbil was a second site being struck. And so we now have confirmation from the U.S. that there are two bases. So what they'll be doing is hardening their bases all over Iraq to the extent that they haven't so far. As we've been discussing before, those bases were already on high alert. People were going around in helmets at that Al-Assad base, for instance, all of the time. When helicopters take off at night, they do so in the dark without lights, so that they're not easy targets. There was a time when planes would come to the major bases in Iraq, that they would do so-called corkscrew landings so that they would minimize their exposure on the way down. But this is precisely the kind of provocation the Pentagon was expecting, maybe a little bolder in scale than they had expected previously, but it is exactly the kind of thing that the President, that the Defense Secretary, and that the Secretary of State of the United States. The question now is, what will they do to retaliate? We know the White House is monitoring these events. They have been briefed. The Pentagon had apparently closed early for snow, but there are now people there meeting in secure areas, presumably talking about what the response would be. Of course, the U.S. Central Command will be on this. They've confirmed that these rocket attacks have happened as well. So you'll have people in the region talking to people here in Washington, and it will be the people here in Washington who will be deciding the larger strategy of retaliation and communicating that down the chain of command.
And as far as that idea of what the US does next, either on the ground in Iraq, from Iraq, or from someplace else, because clearly the US has interests dotted all around the Middle East. The Pentagon, I see now, saying, quote, "We will take all necessary measures to protect and defend US personnel, partners and allies in the region." That statement from the Pentagon, not being too cynical about it, that's just chat. That's giving themselves time to think about not reacting, not overreacting, and not underreacting, because the relationship is so combustible, so tinder dry. Is there a sense there in Washington, John, that they've got to get it right?
Absolutely. There is real consternation on Capitol Hill. Normally, when the U.S. is facing a military crisis like this, the population tends to support the action, even if they later don't. They tend to support the leadership, and in Congress, you tend to have Democrats and Republicans both on one side. But as this situation has escalated, it's really become a partisan issue here in Washington as well. Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential candidate, former vice president, spoke up today saying that Trump has not offered enough evidence. That is something the administration says they will do on Wednesday in Congress, presenting the evidence that they had that Qasem Soleimani posed an immediate and dire threat, and that justified assassinating him. A word, by the way, the U.S. does not like to use in relation to this. So this has become a very controversial issue. There are a lot of people in the U.S., and particularly a lot of Democrats on Capitol Hill, who say that President Trump went too far on this, unless the evidence later shows that it was justified, that Qasem Soleimani was planning attacks that would take the lives of Americans in the coming days. That is an assertion that was made by the U.S. Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, just hours ago. He said it was within days that those attacks would be claiming Americans. Of course, right now we have attacks on two bases where Americans are housed in Iraq. The Pentagon has not told us what the outcome of that is, whether people have been hurt or killed, and of course that process takes hours. But you can bet that right now what they're doing in those bases is examining all the security, all the signal intelligence, satellite intelligence, all of the security cameras at those bases. They're determining precisely where these attacks came from and considering what they're going to do. But you're absolutely right. They're going to want to get this right. And that's why it is probably unlikely that we will see a retaliatory attack in the next few hours, unless the decision has been made in Washington. And that is a possibility because the reporting here is that President Trump was presented with an array of possible options. And the most extreme of those just days ago was the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. And surprising a number of his senior military advisors were told that he chose that option. So he is capable of being decisive in short order if necessary. What we're awaiting here is exactly what the U.S. response will be.
Okay, for the moment, John, many thanks. Well, that statement has been issued by the assistant to the Secretary of Defense. It confirms Iran launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles against U.S. military and coalition forces in Iraq. It's clear that these missiles were launched from Iran and targeted at least 2 Iraqi military bases hosting U.S. military and coalition personnel at Al-Assad and Erbil. The statement goes on to say, "We will take all necessary measures to protect and defend U.S. personnel, partners, and allies in the region." And also, John, one remembers Donald Trump was at the Al-Assad base. I think it was about, what must be 14, 15 months ago. So as and when he gives a news conference, chances are they will write that into what he's saying. Everyone had been saying, however, John, whether it's in Washington, Iraq, Baghdad, or indeed in Tehran, everyone had been saying once the period of mourning for Qasem Soleimani had passed, then there would be something, but nobody was anticipating something as significant and as much of a crosshair bullseye as going for US interests on the ground in Iraq.
Tehran could not possibly have made a bolder statement. You're right, President Trump was there in 2018, December of 2018, a little over a year ago. Mike Pence was at this base as well. It is a well-protected base, but there are a lot of vulnerable targets in there because you just can't simply protect everything from rocket attacks. Tehran is sending the message to the U.S., and in its message, as I understand it, they said that Tehran's retaliation has begun. What it doesn't say is that it's ended, and that means this could continue. Those attacks could still be ongoing, and then that could, of course, prompt retaliatory responses from the U.S. and Pentagon and the White House right now will be gauging what level of response is justified, and they're going to want to walk the line between a strong response and not launching into a hot war against Iran, which would be devastating. It's the kind of thing that President Trump has promised he would get the United States out of. There is a sense of unending war involving the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the last thing the president wants, and the last thing that many of the supporters want, is a war with Iran. The president said just today in his briefing, I campaigned against us being in Iraq, but now we have to stay there. I don't think he wants to dedicate more troops. We've recently seen a number of troops go to that region, and that has swelled to about 50,000 American troops, including most recently a Marine expeditionary force, including Marines and sailors. And then there was the 82nd Airborne, one of the fastest deploying units in the United States. It's supposed to be able to deploy within 18 hours. So the U.S. commitment is very strong there right now. And the last thing the White House wants to do is prompt a hot war. So they're going to be very carefully calibrating what that response is. We don't know whether that will be within hours, days, could be even weeks.
Okay, John, for the moment, many thanks. As we've been reporting here on Al Jazeera, and we're extending our coverage because of these developing aspects to these twin attacks coming to us out of Iraq. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, otherwise known as the IRGC, claiming responsibility for the missile attack, the first one on the Al-Assad air base in Iraq. The US troops are stationed there. The Pentagon says another base in Erbil was also targeted. Of course, this is highly significant. This is the first direct retaliation that people were predicting after the period of mourning had passed. for the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. 3 days of official mourning. There is a distinct sense that one gets
they
a
killed
direct attack on
450
US forces greatly increases the danger of some sort of ongoing, ugly, asymmetric conflict between the US and Iran on Iraqi soil, or indeed in various locations around the broader Middle East. Let's talk to Osama bin Javaid. He's our correspondent in Baghdad. And I noticed as well, Osama, the Revolutionary Guard saying basically Israel is potentially a target as well, because they see Israel as a US ally in the killing of Soleimani. That was pretty predictable.
Absolutely, Peter. If you remember on Friday night, that's exactly what we were discussing. Qasem Soleimani was a figure who was a regional figure. Qasem Soleimani was not just an ordinary Iranian general. He had following from Iran to Syria to Lebanon to Iraq. And you saw the messages which came out from the groups that he had trained, he had supported, he had funded, that they will take revenge. This is something that everybody here in Iraq feared as well. Iraq, again, seems to be the worst expectation that Iraq had, that it will again become a theater of confrontation between world powers, seem to be coming true again tonight, as Iraq was the place where the United States chose to take out Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, and Iraq again is the place where the Iranians chose to attack US forces as well. And US interests are far and wide in this region, and Iran says that it has assets on the ground, groups that it are ideologically aligned or it supports in all of those places where the presence of US forces is. So it is. It seems like that this fear that everybody had in Iraq, that there is going to be retaliation, and that retaliation might happen on Iraqi soil, has come true. We've been hearing the Iraqi government making all sorts of appeals to world leaders that it does not want to get involved in this conflict. The Iraqi Prime Minister on Sunday going to his parliament saying that now that the theater has changed, now the conflict's nature has changed. The coalition troops which were invited by Iraq to fight against ISIL will be defending themselves, and it will be a burden on Iraqi security forces to protect them as well. And that seems to be the case tonight, where Ain al-Assad base has been hit, Erbil has been hit. Erbil is the second target that has been hit, and that has been confirmed by both forces inside Erbil, the northern Kurdish region, as well as Pentagon. And we've been hearing about the location, what the possible locations that could be. There are multiple assets that the American government has on the ground in the Kurdish region. There is the US base just adjacent to the airport. It is again a hub where many operations against ISIL inside Syria, including airstrikes, were being conducted. And then it has another base in Erbil, just north of Erbil. And then there is the US consulate there as well. So according to some sources inside the Kurdish region, that there were some anti-missile systems that were in place. Whether they were effective, they were able to stop any of the missiles, is not clear. And it is not yet clear what sort of damage has been caused in both of these places. There is, as we've seen since Friday night, there's a lot of rumor mongering that has been going on in social media about casualties and damage. But again, so far, no official confirmation from either the Iraqis, the Combined Joint Task Force, or the Pentagon about how, if there has been any casualties, and what kind of damage have these missiles inflicted.
And on that point of what's going on around social media, I noticed as well, Osama, the Reuters news agency quoting the guards advising the US, quotes, to withdraw its troops from that region to prevent the killing of more soldiers. We don't know. That has not been even touched on by the Pentagon. It would perhaps, from where this goes next question, be very, very good if no American lives were lost, because Mr. Trump, in that news conference in the White House 6 hours ago now, returned again and again and again when he was asked, when he was pressed quite firmly as to why Qasem Soleimani was killed. He said he was responsible for the death of one American. So if more than one or two or three or half a dozen Americans have been killed in this airstrike on this US base in Iraq, the US reaction then might be doubly strong.
But that is the nightmare scenario, according to some Iraqi security officials who we've met. They say that this could spark a chain reaction. If you kill one general for one American, and they come back and kill more Americans, what do you do? How many do you take out? And then what happens afterwards? So that is the fear here, especially in Iraq. Iraq has been the theater of war for the last 20 years, if not longer. Iraq has seen all sorts of turmoil. It has come from bitter sectarian fights to the rise of Al-Qaeda and then ISIL. It has faced many fights before and lost thousands and thousands of lives. And that is what Iraqis feared the most, saying that there was nothing that we've done to deserve this. It wasn't a location of our choosing where the Americans targeted Qasem Soleimani. And one MP I spoke to at the parliament told me that the United States at least respects Iran enough that it is sending messages to scale down tensions, it is sending meaderies, it is sending various indirect notes to Iran to bring down the tension, but it is not even talking to Iraq. The United States didn't even consult Iraq when it wanted to carry out that operation. And a lot of people were hurt by the statement that when the US president said that Iraqis will have to pay if they decide to make US forces leave. They will have to pay with their for the institution, for the bases that the United States has built, and they will come under sanctions. And that is something that the Iraqis really took an offense to, saying that there's a lot of sacrifice that the Iraqis have made for not just the United States, but the rest of the world as well in the fight against ISIL. And then again, for a fault, no fault of their own, they've come under attack. It is going to be interesting to see as the story develops of what kind of military hardware was used, what kind of, because we've been hearing that the American forces were making preparations, what kind of safety mechanisms were in place. If there has been damage, what kind of damage has been made both to personnel or facilities. So it is going to be a very difficult few hours, not just for Iraqi forces here as well, but for the coalition forces, many of whom, including the Canadians and the Germans, were planning to leave for their security and safety.
Do you think, Osama, that the Iranians would have told the Iraqis, this is what we're going to do, that big air base halfway between Baghdad and the Syrian border, and the other base up in Erbil, it'll happen tonight?
It is possible, but very unlikely. Iran feels that, and the sense that we've got from some pro-Iran fighters here, is that Iran feels that there was a lapse on Iraq's part when Qasem Soleimani was assassinated. Usually, Qasem Soleimani did go around using a normal mobile network or something, but his movements were very closely guarded, and until he would leave a location, it would not be disclosed. So it's very unlikely that Iraqi security forces, Iraqi government would have been taken into account, because that again would put the Iraqi government into a very awkward position, because it does host the US coalition on its own invitation, although its parliamentarians have said that they're no longer wanted, but legally they are here on Iraq's request. And if there is an imminent threat to the coalition forces which are here to defend Iraq, it would be bound to release that information to them. So having all of that context in mind, it appears that it would be unlikely that the Iranians would have taken the Iraqis into confidence. But the Iranians have warned that every US base, you heard from generals to diplomats saying that every US base, every US soldier in the Middle East is now a target. The Iranians came out and declared every US soldier as a terrorist, essentially, and they said that it is fair game. So all of these bases, not just in Iraq, but across the region as well, there is the presence of US troops in Syria. They are in Lebanon. They're across the GCC as well. So it is going to be a point of thought for all of these bases, where security needs to be in place, where personnel and assets on the ground need to be secured.
Osama, thanks very much. Okay, let's just recap and give a quick 30 seconds on where we know we are right now. And I can tell you the Reuters news agency is saying the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the Defense Secretary Mr. Esper, they have arrived at the White House following that Iranian missile attack on the Iraqi air base. at Al-Assad, which is, as we keep on saying, equidistant between the Iraqi capital Baghdad and the border with Syria. There has also been an attack on another base up north in Erbil. Do we know if these attacks are finished, if they are over? No, we do not. We do know that there was a second wave of missiles with a successful landing of those missiles at the Al-Assad base by up to 13 missiles fired from someplace across the border in Iran. Let's go to Asad Beg, who's our correspondent joining us live from Tehran. Asad, just get us right up to date here. Lots of different aspects and claims and counterclaims coming through from Iran.
Yes, we know that from state TV that there have been 2 waves of attacks so far. Tens of missiles have been fired at United States bases. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has issued statements. So one of the latest statements is that they say that they are warning the great Satan, the arrogant power of the United States, that any new attack or assault will have a very painful and powerful response. And they also said that they do not see Israel as a separate entity for this. But also, I think Iran is making clear that this is a retaliation for a single attack, not an escalation for an all-out war. Now, that may be hard to believe when we see US bases attacked, but there's no appetite for full-scale war here in Iran. The public have been asking for revenge. Senior diplomats, senior politicians, even the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has said that there would be a retaliation, and this is it. What we're seeing now is the retaliation. It was a matter of when, not if, Iran would retaliate. Now, we did hear earlier on during the burial of Qasem Soleimani that the US bases in the region could be a target. Iran has warned regional countries that house US bases that if an attack is launched against Iran using those bases, then Iran will target those bases in those countries. So regional countries will be very nervous at the moment, looking at events unfolding, and they will be in discussions with the United States about whether, if the United States react to this, if those bases in those regional countries are used, because if this goes into a full scale war, it's overwhelming firepower. But it must be remembered that Iran has the ability to change the face of the Middle East with its proxies and militias in Iraq, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also the Houthi rebels in Yemen.
I'm seeing TV reports coming to us out of the States, as said, just to pause our conversation for a second, talking about casualties among Iraqis at that Al-Assad base. Those are just reports, nothing else. Can we on Al Jazeera confirm that? No, we can't. I just want to float that out there so we've got a sense of what's being said about this at the other end of this multiple conversations going on now, because we've got the US president who's been woken up and briefed. He's talking to his defense secretary. There must be a conversation going on Assad as well between the authorities in Tehran and Baghdad, because everyone knows this tit for tat avenue that we might be walking down, the optics surrounding that can change very quickly from just being a tit for tat, strike for strike, to something much more damaging.
I think Iran and many countries in the region will be talking to Iran, especially Baghdad. They will be very concerned at how this could possibly escalate and spiral into a full-scale conflict. Now, did Iran let Baghdad know that they were going to carry out these attacks? I very much doubt it. I think from the Iranian side, there was some disappointment maybe when Qasem Soleimani, General Qasem Soleimani was assassinated. Maybe those relationships have been slightly fraught, but Iran is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard are very secretive. They play their cards very close to their chest, even though that they've been saying that they will retaliate. We've been hearing this for the last few days. Just yesterday, General Hussein Salami promised a chanting crowd that they would have a crushing response to the United States. Now, we do know that Iran does have the ability to fire missiles from its territory to bases in Iraq, to bases in regional countries. We know that the rebels in Yemen, the Houthi rebels, they also have missiles. And if this does go into a full-scale conflict, there are militias, there are proxies in regional countries with the ability to fire missiles into neighboring countries. We saw the Houthi rebels carry out attack against Saudi Aramco oil facilities just last year.
Asad, thanks very much. Let's bring in Mark Kimmitz. He's formerly an Assistant Secretary for Political and Military Affairs under the George W. Bush administration. He joins us live from our bureau in Washington. Mr. Kimmitz, welcome to this rolling coverage here on Al Jazeera. What's the conversation that's going on right now between the US Defense Secretary, Mr. Esper, the Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, and Donald Trump?
I think they're sitting in the Situation Room right now. They'll also have the CIA director in there. They'll have a couple of other key policy-making people inside there, and they're deciding what to do right now in terms of the response. They, of course, will first want to hear from the commanders on the ground. They'll have those people on a VTC inside of there, and they're going to ask for everybody's opinion, and then the president will make the decision.
What do they feel their options will be?
Well, I don't know what they think their options are. I would suspect their options could well be a airstrike against those facilities that fired the missiles. I think that would be the most probable. They may do some other additional targets, such as, I'm speculating now, some of the speedboats in the Persian Gulf, some of the other military facilities where they may have been training some of the proxies inside of Iraq. But you can be sure that the target packages that need to be developed for these kind of operations have already been completed and have been sitting on the shelf for quite some time now.
They didn't tell the Iraqis when they killed Qasem Soleimani, and they didn't tell the Iraqis that that was going to happen. Will they tell the Iraqis what they're going to do now?
Well, what I find interesting is that there doesn't seem to be any hue and cry from the Iraqi government right now talking about the violation of sovereignty. We have pictures of the Ayatollah looking at a screen as these missiles that are being fired from Iraq, from Iran into Iraq. So without a doubt, that was happening. So I think it's reciprocal. The question I ask to you is, has the Grand Ayatollah or the president in Iran called up the Iraqis and informed them that they just violated their sovereignty?
Do you think they will have?
Don't know. I think that's something that somebody ought to ask the Iraqis. They certainly haven't made any condemnation. We have no indication that Parliament is meeting to back up that condemnation. So let's see. It's going to be a long night. There's no doubt about it.
Is part of what you're discussing now happening in the way that nobody seems to take on board the requirement to talk to the Iraqi government, because the Iraqi government is as weak as it's been for several years?
No, I don't think so. I know for a fact that the ambassador talks as necessary and quite frequently with the acting prime minister, even though he is in an acting capacity. It is a caretaker government. So there's no doubt there's conversation going on between the ambassador and the prime minister, the president, and I would expect the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well.
Within that relationship between Donald Trump and Mr. Pompeo, I mean, clearly Mr. Pompeo gives Mr. Trump exactly what Mr. Trump wants. Is Mr. Esper more of a moderating influence when it comes to the reality of what free-range Donald Trump may want to do because it looks good on the TV channels, it looks good on Fox, it plays well to the base?
Well, I don't even need to respond to that because you've already asked the question and answered it yourself. I do not believe that Mike Pompeo, who I've known for many, many years, is a sock puppet of President Trump. He was a CIA director at the very time that Donald Trump was saying, I don't believe the intelligence. Mike Pompeo was one of the biggest anti-Trumpers during the campaign trail. I don't think they necessarily have a relationship, as you would suggest, where Mike Pompeo simply parrots and feeds back the president what he wants to hear.
Okay, Mr. Kimmitt, for the moment, thanks very much. You're watching Al Jazeera and our continuing coverage of developing news out of Iraq. More than a dozen ballistic missiles have been fired at US facilities in 2 Iraqi air bases were targeted, one in Erbil and the other one at the Ain al-Assad air base in the province of Anbar. Iran state TV says the Revolutionary Guards launched tens of surface-to-surface missiles. The US Assistant to the Secretary of Defense issued a statement. It confirms Iran launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles against US military and coalition forces in Iraq. It is clear that these missiles were launched from Iran and targeted at least 2 Iraqi military bases, hosting US military and coalition personnel at Al-Assad and Erbil. The statement goes on to say, we will take all necessary measures to protect and defend US personnel, partners and allies in the region. We're in conversation with Mark Kimmitt, formerly an Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs under the George W. Bush administration. He joins us from Washington. So we're pretty clear on what they feel their options might be, Mark Kimmitt. Will there be pause for thought in the White House right now as they're having that meeting in the Situation Room as to the optics around a tit-for-tat situation? That can change, that can descend into being something completely different very quickly.
Well, it certainly can, but when you talk about the optics, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Iranians fired their missiles at exactly the same time that the missile was fired at Qasem Soleimani. So there's obviously some optics being worked on both sides. The photo of the senior Iranian officials looking at the screen as the Iranian missiles are being fired. So I think both sides understand that optics are important here, that you're not only trying to achieve a military target, but you're also trying to get a message out. So I think it's happening on both sides.
Is that why they went for an airbase that Donald Trump himself visited in December of 2018, do you think?
It could well be. All presidents have visited Assad. I was with President Bush when he visited Assad in, I believe it was 2007. So that is a very large concentration. But I think it's also important to understand that it is among the furthest bases west inside of Iraq. It could also be a very clear signal to the Israelis that they have a reach, that they're not just firing at bases near Baghdad, but they're reaching all the way across Baghdad, Iraq. And if they can reach all the way across Iraq, they can reach all the way into Israel.
Can I ask you one final question, Mr. Kimmitt, relating to or pertaining to Mr. Trump's news conference inside the Oval Office a little earlier today? Not directly, specifically to what we're discussing now, because that is maybe still ongoing. But when he talked about how we have eradicated ISIL from Iraq, he didn't go on to flesh that out, because the reality is that, yes, the US-led coalition in Iraq eradicated, by and large, ISIL from its strongholds up and down Iraq. Arguably, they're regrouping in places like the southern half of Libya. But he should have gone on, should he not, can I suggest you, to say, with the help of the militia on the ground in Iraq. And some of the analysts we were talking to last Friday and Saturday were saying, well, there was a revolving door relationship between the militia that worked for Qasem Soleimani and the other militia that the United States was working with to get rid of ISIL.
Well, I think we can be more specific than that. We had a relationship with the PMFs through the Iraqi security forces. We would not provide air support for the PMFs. We would not provide equipment directly to the PMF, but obviously the Iraqi security forces did. So nobody's taking away from the PMFs valor and heroics on the battlefield against ISIS. They were the first to the battlefield after the fatwa from Najaf, far sooner than the reconstructed and reformulated Iraqi security forces. So we shouldn't take away from the PMFs their valor on the battlefield or their accomplishments on the battlefield. It's not the fight against ISIS that is relevant. It is what they've done in the post-fight against ISIS that is relevant.
Okay, Mr. Kimmitt, good to talk to you as ever. Many thanks. Let's talk to Asad Beg. He's our correspondent on the line for us out of Tehran. And again, Asad, we're getting this kind of drip of statements coming through. What else are we hearing?
Well, what's coming out of Iran is that this is a retaliation for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. This is not an escalation from Iran's perspective to a all-out war or a wider conflict. And they've given the United States that option. So essentially what Iran is saying is, don't retaliate to this, because if you do, then we will have to retaliate again. So it depends on what action the United States takes from now. We know that tens of missiles were fired from Iran to United States bases in Iraq. We know that there's been 2 waves of attacks that's been confirmed on state media here. The Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps has issued statements. They've sent out warnings. They've also said that if there is a retaliation using bases from regional countries, Iran will target those countries. They've also said that any attack that is launched against Iran does not see Israel as a separate entity from the United States. So this could, if the United States retaliates to this attack, this does threaten drawing in Israel and other countries into what could be a wider conflict.
Which I guess is a manifestation of why particularly 2 high-profile countries in this region have been signaling since Friday very clearly to the United States, look, please handle this properly, because our names might be in the frame here.
Yes, the countries are very nervous. To understand the position that Iran holds. There's a Strait of Hormuz where 20% of the world's oil passes through, and that waterway between Iran and Oman is only 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, and the shipping lanes are only about 3 kilometers wide. So if this does escalate, Iran has always said that they have the ability to close down the Strait of Hormuz, which could have global ramifications. The regional countries, they've been asking the United States to have some restraint. We know that the country foreign minister was here and he had asked Iran for restraint. The response from Iran was that they're all out of patience and restraint after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. So this, from Iran's perspective, is revenge for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. His burial, the 4th day of mourning, was just last night. We saw crowds coming out onto the streets, filling up his home city of Kerman. On Monday, we saw his funeral take place in Tehran, where the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei led those prayers, and crowds that large, that many people out in the streets had not been seen in Iran for 30 years since the funeral of the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khamenei. So the government here, the authorities here, the political establishment here does have widespread support right now, because people on the streets were asking for revenge. The politicians said that they would carry out revenge. The military leaders are saying that they would retaliate, and that's exactly what they've done.
Asad, sit tight. We have 3 correspondents monitoring these ongoing developments in real time. Asad Beg, as you've just been hearing there, is in Tehran. Osama bin Javed in Baghdad. John Hendren is in Washington, D.C. Let's go to you, John. So they're in the Situation Room. We're talking about Mr. Esper. We're talking about Mr. Pompeo. We're talking clearly about Donald Trump, the US president, the CIA. And I guess the first thing they'll want to hear, they want to hear from the base commanders who are running the shows, who've been hit in the past couple of hours.
That's right. One of the first things they're going to want to know is how many people have been wounded or killed. As you were discussing a little earlier, it was one death that seemed to prompt the assassination of Soleimani. This could be another major reason for retaliation in the U.S. So the first thing they're going to want to do is assess exactly what has happened in those attacks. And I can't confirm this, but I am seeing multiple reports that a third base has been struck in Taji. Again, we can't confirm that. I'm seeing a number of reports from local media that that is the case. If so, that would mean that Iran has struck northern Iraq, hitting the Kurdish territory. It has struck Al Anbar province and about 27 kilometers north of Baghdad in Taji. So there's a real possibility for some major repercussions for deaths. injuries, and that is going to be the information that the White House is fielding. One suspects that if it is bad enough, that we might hear from the White House within the next 24 hours or so. They're going to want to respond to this, whether in a statement or possibly even the president himself. So they're going to be in those rooms right now assessing exactly what happens. I don't think we're going to expect to hear from them until we know exactly what that is, and that's going to require these attacks to come to an end. And it's not clear to me that that has happened yet. So this appears to be multiple waves of attacks like there are.
When that square conversation is taking place, John, between Mr. Trump, Mr. Pompeo, Mr. Esper, and the CIA, and they've got a handle on what actually happened at these two, we now understand perhaps 3 bases, who is the person that's saying to the Trump administration broadly, look, this is a very, very dangerous and yet incredibly nuanced situation. You've got to react accordingly. Or maybe Mr. Trump doesn't feel the pressure to react to a nuanced situation because he is a free-range kind of guy, even when it comes to this kind of thing.
Yeah, what the Pentagon will generally do, what the Defense Secretary will generally do, is present a series of options. And that is apparently what happened when Soleimani was killed. The president was at Mar-a-Lago. It was during the holidays. This is his vacation resort in Florida. And he was apparently pulled out of a celebration and was presented with a number of different options for things that the military could do. And he picked what, by all reports, was the most extreme of them. So there may not be anybody in there suggesting that he measure his tone. If there would be anybody with the authority to do that, it would be the Defense Secretary or Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, who, by all reports, is aggressively in favor, even pushing Trump toward killing Soleimani. So you'll have an entire national security staff there. Likely the president is being presented with a bunch of options that, as Mark Kimmett discussed earlier, are all going to have been on the shelf for quite some time. They will have prepared for this. And now he will be picking what exactly the White House is going to do. And that's going to be based in part on how many casualties there are.
But I guess as well, you don't have to be a military strategist to know there is no perfect reaction to this situation, given, if only, the adoration that we apparently saw from hundreds of thousands of people on the ground in Iran. Whatever Donald Trump does, unless he does nothing at all, is going to get a highly negative reaction in Tehran and in Baghdad.
Absolutely. There is an incredibly dangerous risk of creeping escalation. If this attack results in massive casualties, the temptation for the president, and it's generally in his nature, would be to go with a more dramatic response. And Tehran has already, as we've all been discussing, has already warned against that. That would certainly launch another series of retaliatory attacks by Tehran. This is a really dangerous place, and that's going to be what they're discussing. They're going to be sitting in that room discussing what is a response that will be strong enough to satisfy the dignity of the American people and the troops who have been either killed or injured or at least attacked in this case, but will stop short of prompting a full-scale war or a more dramatic escalation from Tehran. That's going to be the calibration that they will be discussing. Whether they get it right, well, that's a matter for history. That's a matter for history to decide.
John, thanks very much. Well, events have been moving very quickly in the past, 4.5, 5 hours now, before the news broke that 2, perhaps 3 bases have been targeted by Iran's Revolutionary Guard forces, with 2 waves of missiles hitting that Ain al-Assad base 2.5 hours ago. Mr. Trump, before that, had an impromptu news conference along with the Greek Prime Minister inside the White House. He was talking about the killing of Soleimani as, quote, having saved a lot of lives, and many countries have thanked him, he said. He also went on to say Soleimani was planning imminent attacks with more details to be revealed to Congress on Wednesday.
We had tremendous information. We've been following him for a long time, and we followed his path for those 3 days. And they were not good stops. We didn't like where he was stopping. They were not good stops. We saved a lot of lives. He's been called a monster, and he was a monster. And he's no longer a monster. He's dead. And that's a good thing for a lot of countries. And he was planning a very big attack and a very bad attack for us and other people. And we stopped him.
Okay, let's bring in a friend of Al Jazeera, Lawrence Korb, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense. He joins us on Skype from Washington. Lawrence, great to have you back here on the program as ever. What's your reading of where we are right now?
Well, basically, President Trump has no good options. He thought that killing Soleimani would put a stop to this tit for tat, if you will, responses. He does not want to get the United States in a big war with Iran. I mean, Iran is much bigger, for example, than Iraq. But on the other hand, he doesn't want to look weak because basically he thought that killing Soleimani would put a stop to all of this. And remember, he ran as the president who's going to get us out of these wars. If you count the troops he sent in after the recent attacks on the U.S. Bases in December, we have 60,000 troops in the region right now. And so he has no good options, and it'll be fascinating to see what he does. We do remember after the Iranians blew up the Saudi oil fields, he didn't retaliate. The Iranians may have taken that as a signal that they could, push him by attacking the American bases and killing the contractor. And of course, then he retaliated by killing General Soleimani. The real issue is going to be, are there any Americans that are killed in these attacks on the 2 or maybe 3 bases? Some of the information I've seen suggests that the Iranians attacked the Iraqi portion of the bases where the troops are, not together.
Interesting when you talk about his reaction might be colored by his desire, or his administration's desire, perhaps, to broaden it out slightly, not to look weak in the face of what might still be ongoing as you and I are talking. But looking at the announcements coming out of Tehran, there is a certain goading element to what they're saying. I think that's a fair interpretation of these little bullet points that we're getting from the Revolutionary Guard. But if Donald Trump doesn't have any good options, what's his least worst option?
Well, I think his least worst option would be to maybe attack an Iranian ship, for example, in the Strait of Hormuz, or to basically hit some of the Iranian forces that are in Iraq. Those are the type of things I think we can do. And don't forget, we have the whole situation with Iraq. How are the Iraqis going to take whatever his response is? Will it get them to want to move the U.S. forces out, which would undermine our security, because ISIS is reconstituting itself not as a caliphate, but as a terrorist group.
Who's telling him what to do inside this meeting that's going on inside the White House?
Well, basically, I think he's going to get the options. Secretary Esper has come out today and say he would not attack the cultural site. Remember, the president said that if the Iranians retaliate, he's going to attack 52 sites to basically, because that's how many hostages the Iranians took in 1979. Will he attack any of those, or maybe attack 1 or 2 of those sites, but not the cultural sites?
We have seen Donald Trump in the past on several occasions to do with several aspects of his relationships with other world leaders around the globe say one thing, and then 2, 3, 4 weeks later, his Secretary of State says something else. So the policy, which was kind of delivered on the hoof, tilts into being something else. But this is the most crucial moment of the Trump presidency, surely.
Oh, no doubt about it, because he put himself in there. And even today, before we knew about these attacks, he said he would respond forcefully if the Iranians did something. And of course, they have done something.
And so this puts him in a very, very difficult position. Secretary Pompeo was very radical. He's wanted to go after Soleimani for quite a while. It'll be interesting to see what Secretary Esper does, because I think our military people know that a widespread conflict with Iraq would be much worse than happened in Iran. And, we lost several thousand people there and in Iraq. And look at the situation now that it seems to be, an Iranian satellite.
Lawrence Paul there in the States, thank you very much. Just a reminder of our developing story this hour out of Iraq, and we first our normal schedule to bring you continuing coverage. Iran says it's launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles at US facilities in Iraq. At least 2 bases have been targeted, one in Erbil, and the other one is the Ain al-Assad air base in the province of Anbar. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has issued a warning to US allies in the region, saying they'll be attacked if their countries are used for strikes against Tehran. Let's go to Asad Beg, who's our correspondent in Tehran. Asad, any clarity yet as to whether this is 2 bases attacked twice, or has there been an attack on a 3rd base as well?
At the moment, we're not sure, but what I can tell you is news coming out of this new news agency, which has links to the Revolutionary Guard here. Now, what we're hearing is that these missiles could have been launched from the western Kermanshah province, which is the closest Iranian site to the US base, Ain al-Assad, which is about 322 kilometers away. Now, there's a possibility that these attacks on the US base were launched from that province. The missiles that could have been used, and this is all that's coming from other sources currently, which is a 4313, which has a range of around 500 kilometers. The IRGC has said when they carried out these attacks around 1:30 to 2 a.m. local time, that it was trying to fulfill their promise. They said that tens of missiles had been fired at Ain al-Assad base, which they described as the capital of the United States in Iraq. And they said that they are sending a message to the great Satan, to the arrogant United States. But they've also warned that any retaliation could result in a wider conflict, and they've specifically highlighted Israel, that they do not see any differentiation between Israel and the United States. But Iran is also making clear that this is a retaliation for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, essentially giving the United States an out, because Iran does not want an all-out war, does not want an escalation. They're saying this is a retaliation for a single act. But if they are attacked, if the United States does retaliate, Iran has warned for further escalation, further retaliation. And remember, Iran has proxies and allies and militias in the region. They have militias in Iraq. They have the Houthi rebels in Yemen. They have Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have also a presence in militias in Syria. So this could escalate very quickly if the United States responds to these missile attacks that have been carried out early this morning around local time.
Some of the analysts, Asad, who've been talking to in the past 2 hours, have all been saying the same thing, and it's this: there's a certain kind of manipulation of the optics going on here, and part of the appeal for targeting the Al-Assad base was because Donald Trump visited that base himself in December of 2018. Now, as a one-off or a two-off spectacular, okay, from a military point of view, we'll go with that. From a planning point of view, yes. But can Iran sustain this? Because the other thing that everyone's saying is Iran cannot maintain a symmetric situation of war squaring off against the United States.
Well, there's no doubt that the United States has overwhelming firepower. I think everyone knows that. But Iran does have the ability to change the face of the Middle East. And we have to be clear about that. If you look at the positioning of Iran regionally and the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil passes through, the narrowest point between Iran and Oman is only 33 kilometers wide. Those waterways, those shipping lanes are only 3 kilometers wide. Now, Iran can close the Strait of Hormuz. We don't know how long they will be able to sustain that, but that would cause global disruption. Iran does have the ability to strike United States bases in regional countries. And earlier on yesterday, there was some talk about 19 bases in the region. That statement was quickly retracted from within Iran. But they do have the ability to target those bases. Hezbollah in Lebanon have missiles. They can target Israel. The Houthi rebels have shown that they can target Saudi Arabia, and Shia militias inside Iraq have said that if Iran is attacked, they will target US bases and US forces. So Iran cannot have a direct conflict with the United States, but they will give it a go. But there's no appetite for a full-out war here. Iran is making very clear that this is a retaliation for the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. They don't want an all-out war, and the United States has said that they do not want a wider conflict. So the ball is really in the United States court current. If they retaliate to this, Iran again will be forced to further escalate. And remember, there have been hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets across Iran for the funeral and the 3 days or 4 days of mourning for General Qasem Soleimani. The government, the political establishment here does have popular support currently. This wasn't the case back in November where there were anti-government protests taking place. The assassination of Qasem Soleimani by the United States has mobilized people and in support of the government and in support of the political establishment there. And there have been calls for revenge from the streets of Iran, not just from the politicians, not just from the military leaders, not just from the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, but from the people on the streets. We heard it in Tehran on Monday. The word that was being used was intiqam, which is a Farsi word for revenge, and that was echoed again over the last 4 days. So there is popular support, and there will be support for the actions that Iran has taken today. But is there an appetite for wider escalation? No, there isn't.
That's it. Thanks very much. Let's talk to Joshua Landis, who's the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. He joins us on Skype from the city of Norman. Joshua, welcome back to Al Jazeera. Where are we with this just now? What's your reading of how difficult, how dangerous the situation can get?
Well, it can get very dangerous because Iran is committed to escalating. Zarif, the foreign minister, and others made it very clear months ago that Iran could not afford to capitulate to the United States because they believe that the United States wants regime change and would crush them. So they have to escalate. Ever since President Trump scuttled the Atlantic, there has been a steady escalation. And that neither side can afford to give in because they'll look weak. The leaders of both sides have committed to this escalation, and it's hard to see how it gets, where the off-ramp is and how people can de-escalate.
On a scale of 1 to 10, up to this latest situation, as of what happened last Friday, in the early hours of Friday morning when Qasem Soleimani was assassinated near the airport, how would you sum up the US relationship with Iraq? I mean, on the one hand, you've got people saying it's always been a complete disaster. On the other hand, you've got other people saying, well, actually, the US gave Iraq democracy.
Well, you can quibble about what kind of government Iraq has, and certainly there are some Iraqis who are happier today than they were under Saddam Hussein. But the basic fact is that the United States, in order to destroy the order that was in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, cast the Sunni Arabs from the top of society down to the bottom and catapulted the Shiite Arabs, who were at the bottom of society previously under Saddam Hussein, 60% of the population, to the top, and gave them the government. And the government is run by Shiites today. They have a majority in parliament, and they voted for America to get out. They are sympathetic to Soleimani. They are sympathetic to Iran. The Shiites, by and large, in Iraq, look at Soleimani as a hero. He came in, he saved them from ISIS, who was sweeping in, possibly going to take Baghdad in 2014. He organized the Shiite militias, he armed them, he helped, Iran helped them to turn back ISIS. So did America, but many people are grateful to Soleimani for that. Now, Sunni Arabs, many of them look at Soleimani as a criminal in the same way that in the same way that President Trump does. But Iraq is divided. The thing is that the Shiites have the majority, and they voted, and they are sympathetic by and large to Soleimani. And that's something that America did. They did not understand, America did not understand Iraqi realities, and that's been borne out time after time. We've miscalculated every time.
Is there any chance, Joshua, in your mind, that what the Iranians have now done is symbolically significant and will be a one-off?
It's not a one-off. You know, this is, once the arms deal, once the nuclear deal was stopped by President Trump coming into office, he believed he could get a better deal. That's what he said. Other people in the administration believe that Iran is just a bad actor and it needed to be crushed. And that's, you know, that's, I think, what the prevailing mood is in this administration. Pompeo and others believe that Iran is weak. It's a small actor in the region, and America can do a tremendous damage fairly easily. And it probably can. That's, you know, of course, that's why Iran has to be extremely cautious in the coming weeks, because the United States, if it really winds up, can do tremendous damage to Iran, as it's done already. And we saw that what America did to Gaddafi, what it did to Saddam Hussein, and it's willing to do, you know, maybe it's willing to do the same thing to Iran. I think not, but it can do a lot of damage to Iran. And so this is a dangerous escalation.
We understand, Joshua, that Donald Trump is going to talk to America, i.e. talk to the world, within the hour. Would it be fair if I inferred from that a decision has been taken? I mean, is this going to be a George Bush Desert Storm is up and running, we're doing something kind of moment, or will it be we're underreacting, we're playing it calm? I think we've lost Joshua Landis there in Norman in the States. We'll go back to Joshua if we can. Let's go back to an earlier conversation we had with Ismail al-Sudani, a retired Iraqi brigadier general. He gave us his view on how far the Iranian government may go in terms of retaliation following the assassination of Soleimani on Friday.
Iranians are taking the credit to hit back directly. They wouldn't even leave their proxies to deliver the message to the Americans. That is expected, and by the way, it's kind of saving face for them, because killing Soleimani is an insult from the Americans to Iranian establishment, to Iranian state as whole, and therefore I think Iranian has to retaliate. I mean, they are compelled to retaliate in a way that would be selecting the target with the same volume or the size of killing Soleimani, as well as it's going to be impacted, as well as what has impacted on Iran. So Iran has selected this option, but I don't think so. This is going to be the only retaliation from Iran. The conflict is already been on Iraq, between the United States and Iran. Iran has proxies, and they were delivering all the way with the message Iraqi soil to Americans who are supporting the Iraqi forces. But I think this time is different than other times. The killing, as I said, the killing of General Soleimani was an insult to the Iranians. So the asymmetrical warfare that we are expecting is not going to be in a way to prevent it. So we cannot prevent this kind of warfare by any means. Even by diplomatic means, I don't think so Iranian would be accepting to sit on the table to negotiate any kind of resolution or compromise with the Americans. Iranian also will give the liberty or the freedom to their proxies in the region to retaliate in a way they selected. So it's for me, I think this is the most they can do. They don't want to go in a war, or we can say a war that is a comprehensive war, a conventional war with the Americans, because they are unable to do so. But also, I think Americans also do not want to go to the war, because the decision for the war can be easily started. The decision to end the war. If that attack would be resulted of heavy casualties on the Americans, there would be the retaliation something different. If there would be no casualties, it's only minor casualties or materialistic casualties, then the retaliation will be different also. So it depends on the evaluation of format of the attack and how the American would be reacting towards this kind of attack. So in my perspective, that the Americans will favor to de-escalation the situation, because I think their forces in Iraq are vulnerable. There are lots of non-state actors should deliver the message or deliver the reaction, and that would be causing a lot of casualties maybe. And therefore, I think United States will go for de-escalation of the situation.
Okay, that was an earlier conversation that we had maybe about 90 minutes ago now. Within the ebb and flow of reaction to what's going on in Iraq, we understand that there has now been a meeting convened inside the situation, inside the White House in Washington. We're talking about the CIA, we're talking about Mr. Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, we're talking about Mr. Esper, the Defense Secretary, and Donald Trump. Mr. Trump, we understand, will address the world, address the nation, the United States, within the hour. What does that mean as to the decision-making process? We will have to wait and see. But the US Assistant Secretary of Defense did issue a statement about 2 hours ago now, confirming Iran has launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles against US military and coalition forces in Iraq. It is clear that these missiles were launched from Iran and targeted at least 2 Iraqi military bases hosting US military and coalition personnel at Al-Assad and Erbil. The statement goes on to say, we will take all necessary measures to protect and defend US personnel, partners and allies in the region. That's with John Hendren, who's our correspondent in Washington. So John, as we wait for the US President Donald Trump, maybe worth saying, since the Defense Department put out that statement, there have been these reports saying that the third base has maybe been targeted as well.
That's right. While I've been sitting here, my colleague Ayanna Brickhouse has been reaching out to the Pentagon. A senior defense official said they're only confirming 2 bases have been struck, that is Erbil in the north of Iraq and the Al-Assad base in Anbar province. There were some reports that a base in Taji, which is about 27 kilometers north of Baghdad, was struck. The Pentagon says that is not the case, and the confusion may lie in the fact that these bases are constantly harassed, often with shoulder-launched rockets or other projectiles. So there might have been some confusion over some small incident there, but in any case, the Pentagon is simply saying that 2 bases have been struck, and there are initial reports of Iraqi casualties. We have heard no reports of American casualties, but of course, any casualty inside those bases is potential cause for retaliation. It would be interesting to see the Iraqi government's response to that. But as you say, right now, you've got all these officials in Washington gathered in the Situation Room, and in that room, the president would be flanked by the Defense Secretary on one side, the Secretary of State on the other. There would also be the Director of National Intelligence, the head of the CIA, the Treasury, believe it or not. Often there is a Department of Justice official in there that may be to talk about what legalities are involved. But in any case, if the president is indeed going to speak to us in just a matter of minutes or an hour or so, that suggests that they believe that this incident has drawn to a close. They have been able to assess what the casualties are, and they will base their response on the number and the effect of those casualties inside their base. But again, those are two massive, sprawling bases. It would take time to scour them and determine exactly what the damage is. And by all accounts, that is what has been going on since we've been talking.
2 points, John. Point number one, we understand as well now that Mr. Trump will not be talking to the nation. So clearly there's a lot of footwork, delicate footwork going on below the surface when it comes to what they're planning, what they're thinking about, and how they are guessing they're going to get that out there in the public domain. But you raise an interesting point there about having the best legal brains in the room, the Situation Room at the same time, because you've reminded me of a strand of our conversation from last Friday, which is this, that if the US goes to war, it's got to go to Congress first, and they've got to talk about it.
That's right. Under the War Powers Act of 1973, a president can only engage in hostilities for something like 48 hours. He must go to Congress to get approval for a war, and Congress can cut off after 60 days. Now, of course, the problem right now is that you have a Democratic-controlled House, a Republican-controlled Senate, and that Republican-controlled Senate has shown a willingness to go along with President Trump on a number of things, but it has drawn the line on foreign affairs policy. Sanctions with Russia, for example, are something they disagreed with the president on. So it is conceivable that Congress could take a strong hand here. And this may be part of the White House calculus when they talk about on Wednesday, a matter of hours from now, going to Congress and presents that Qasem Soleimani presented some kind of dire and immediate threat to American lives. That could be part of the calculus there. The president has also said he's trying to avoid a war. The Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, just hours ago here in Washington said the Defense Department was not seeking a war, but it was essentially prepared to wage war. So theoretically, the calculus here is to come up with a kind of retaliation that would fall short of engaging in an outright war. Maybe one of the reasons the president is not coming out is because they're still waiting to get information on exactly what has happened tonight and whether all of those events are over.
And as to that calculus, John, I mean, we were talking to various people in the past hour or so. Joshua Landis was saying this, that nobody wants to lose face here. Nobody wants to appear weak. But other analysts seem to be putting forward the idea, look, if you want to go down the road of retaliation, talking about the US, you can't go further down the road than killing Qasem Soleimani. That's the most damaging thing you could do, if only because his arc of influence went all the way, we're being told, down to the Houthis in Yemen. And he wasn't a man with a plan, he was the plan.
That's right. And President Trump has kind of boxed himself into a corner here because he's already said that if Iran retaliates, as it now clearly has, that the U.S. would indeed retaliate again on Iran. So he's got a face-saving problem if he doesn't retaliate. And there would be diplomats, some perhaps in that room, the Situation Room we've been talking about, it would suggest that no retaliation might be the appropriate act. The U.S. has already pre-retaliated, so to speak. That doesn't really sound like Donald Trump to me. He's a guy who makes threats and doesn't want to look weak. He has shown a willingness to pull back from military conflict in the past. But if he's issued this threat to retaliate, it will be very difficult for him, one suspects, given his general nature, to simply do nothing at this stage.
Okay, John, thank you very much. A little detour in this story for you at the moment. There are still civil aircraft in the air above Iraq, flying through Iraqi airspace. The Federal Aviation Authority has issued emergency restrictions for Persian Gulf airspace, citing potential for miscalculation or misidentification. What that means to flying through airspace here over this region, we'll have to give that a few hours to simmer that one down and get a handle on that for you. Let's talk about where we are with this story as of right now. Iran says it's launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles at US facilities in Iraq. At least 2 bases have been targeted, one in Erbil, and the other one is the Ain al-Assad Air Base in the province of Anbar. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has issued a warning to Israel and other US allies in the region, saying there'll be attacks if their countries are used for strikes against Tehran. Kimberly Halkett is a correspondent at the White House. So Kimberly, in that building behind you, they're in the Situation Room deciding what to do next.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as John has been reporting, the president is not making any decisions on his own. He is flanked by the U.S. Secretary of Defense, the U.S. Secretary of State, and the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But this is certainly something, as John was discussing, the president telegraphed essentially his next move and has backed himself into a corner. We remember just a few hours ago, the U.S. president was sitting in the Oval Office, flanked by the Prime Minister of Greece, in which he said very clearly, we're prepared to attack Iran if we have to as retribution. He also said if Iran does anything they shouldn't be doing, they're going to be suffering consequences very strongly. Now, the president has always said he doesn't telegraph his next move, yet he has done exactly that. So people in the United States watching very carefully. As I came in here, my Uber driver was gripped to the radio, listening to live broadcasts of each and every development and expressing concern, saying that his daughter was a deployed member of the U.S. military. There's a very real sense of tension here in Washington right now. The ordinary American is aware that something major has happened, and given the fact that most Americans don't generally watch the developments that happen in the Middle East, they tend to be fairly insular. This shows the gravity and the significance to the ordinary American. And there is a visible presence, I should add, outside the White House right now, given the fact that there are those high-profile men and women advising the president as part of his national security team on next steps. There is heightened security outside the White House, something we don't typically see at this hour. But even that we've seen in some of the major metro stops. As I was leaving the White House in the last couple of hours, that was also increased security. So just to give you a sense of the feeling and the mood here in Washington, it is very tense, and there is a realization that this president, the commander-in-chief, has escalated this tit-for-tat back and forth to a point that most Americans are now saying we could be at war.
And the kaleidoscope of consequences around a tit-for-tat can change so dramatically with one missile that's misfired or hits the wrong target.
Indeed, and here's the thing that we know from the reporting that the FAA, as you said, has issued the emergency restrictions for Persian Gulf airspace. We're also hearing some reporting, we cannot confirm this, but there are U.S. military planes now in the air from the base known as Diego Garcia, which we know would have been the sort of launch pad, if you will, if there was some sort of attack on Iran. Now the question becomes, just because the planes are in the air, the president still has to make the next decision, and that is whether or not those planes, potentially F-35 bombers, whether they will strike. And so that's what we think is happening right now. Now, this is all speculation. None of this has been confirmed. And that's why people are watching very carefully to try and determine whether or not the U.S. president would be making some sort of address, because we know historically, not just this administration, but previous administrations, in these types of moments, we often see the president speak to the nation. Now, we are, as you confirmed, and we have as well, that it seems unlikely that is going to happen. That doesn't mean the president may or may not act. We're still trying to read those tea leaves, if you will. But the president was very clear. Well, again, he says he does not telegraph his next move. He essentially did just that just a few hours ago in the Oval Office, saying that he would retaliate and it would be proportional.
Very briefly, Kimberly, neither you or I have the inside track on Pentagon military planning, but broadly speaking, what will Mr. Trump be ruminating over here when it comes to possible options? Because the Iranians were signaling it very clearly. They were saying again and again, look, 3 days of mourning, then we will do something, and it looks like they've done it.
Well, the timing is significant. The fact that we know that the United States will often strike in the dark of night. So we have to think about the timing. It's the dark of night here, but it's very early in the evening. Often these things, if there is going to be some sort of response, we come in the early morning hours, local time in the region. So that's one thing to watch for. The other thing that's being watched for very carefully, and the reports that the president would be considering, is any sort of response always needs to be somewhat proportional. And so the question becomes, what kind of casualties are we seeing as a result of these attacks on these bases? Was it Americans that were included potentially in these casualties? If there are sort of a lengthening list, is it Iraqi? Is there consultation with those in theater? All of that is taking place. So while the U.S.
So I got to finish up this shit. So I write that one. I got to write them all down. No, they're all not that bad. That's
in recent years, there is a highly qualified team of those who make sort of sober second thought, careful calculations surrounding him at this moment. Because I think, again, there is the recognition and the gravity. This is a president that is not that adept when it comes to foreign policy. This is not his forte. He needs to draw on the experience of those advisors, which we know are surrounding him in the Situation Room at the Tower.
Kimberly, we'll come back to as soon as there are any more developments. In the meantime, thank you very much for that missile attack. Attacks plural, indeed. They come just hours after Qasem Soleimani was led to the Hamas. As we've been hearing for 3 days of mourning, there was huge crowds crammed into the funeral procession. The city of Stampede broke out, killing more than 50 people. Earlier, Asad Beg sent us this report from Tehran.
Desperate of news of family and friends, people queue outside the hospital in the city of Kerman. Inside, the injured filling hospital beds and being treated in its corridors. What had begun as a day with large numbers of people turning out to pay their respects to an assassinated commander, ending with more death in the streets of his hometown. Several hours after the funeral of Qasem Soleimani began on Tuesday morning, there was a stampede among the crowds. The procession turning into a crush and desperate efforts to save the lives of people where they fell. The small city, unable to deal with the vast numbers that had converged on it, Iranians from across the country had made their way to Kerman for what was supposed to be Soleimani's final procession.
I come here because I love General Soleimani.
I am a Sunni from Bandar Abbas, and we want to show that we are also here for.
If any new developments come up, I'm gonna come back to it. Take a break for now, brothers and sisters. Hey, Akim and Aqua. Hey, Kolo Yahaba Shimel Shah, Bashim Kakudash, Brati Hawa, Brati Al Shah, Brati Hawa, Brati Al Shah. Y'all probably come back and live stream again if something else pop up anytime soon. Hey, keep peace strong, keep believing, keep the faith. Hey, man, praise God, Bashim Al Shah. Prayer without ceasing.
Final word first. We will avenge harshly.
Hey, Kolo Yahaba Shimel Shah, Yahweh Rakazah, this beginning of the end, brothers. We'll be almost out of here.
You will burn that place you love, and they themselves know where it is.
Politicians gathered in parliament declaring death to America, no compromise, no surrender, and revenge. And voting to designate the Pentagon and US forces terrorist organizations.
All those who ordered, as well as the perpetrators of this crime, who are with the Pentagon and their military, are counted as terrorists.
For 4 days, crowds have taken to the streets to honor and pay their respects to Qasem Soleimani. The tragic events of Tuesday in Kerman have added even more grief before Iran decides to take its next move. Asad Beg, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
We have our full correspondent